So do you all remember Chilton Books, the publisher of those car repair manuals? What would you say if I told you that Sterling Lanier, editor for Chilton Books, was the person who brought Dune to the world? Dune was originally rejected a lot by major publishers because it was so long, 200,000 words, which was approximately 4 times longer than novels of that day. Hardcovers would exceed $5 per copy, which in the 1960s wasn't exactly cheap. It was a big gamble for publishers, also due in part to the fact that Dune was so complex and contained a lot of words that were unique to its world. But it was Sterling Lanier at Chilton Books who gave Dune the green light, and if he hadn't, we might never have read the story, and the epic movies that followed would never have been part of our reality. Sterling must have realized that he made the right call when Dune won Nebula and Hugo Awards. Dune Messiah came out 4 years after the first novel. Many people didn't want to see the dark side of Paul Atreides, but Herbert, having been a student of politics and well aware that everyone makes mistakes, knew that heroes make mistakes, and their mistakes are compounded by the mistakes their followers make as well. That is why the story is supposed to be about the dangers of charismatic leaders, even though fans didn't want to see Paul Atreides fall. Nonetheless, it still sold well, and led to Frank Herbert being involved in the environmentalist movement. He spoke at the first Earth Day event in Philadelphia and traveled throughout the U.S. speaking to college students. It makes sense that Frank Herbert was so involved, since Dune is also a story about protecting the planet and its resources. Herbert believed that people were forcing themselves on the environment instead of working with it, and he saw ecology as the science of understanding consequences, with Herbert dedicating the first Dune novel to dryland ecologists. And when Children of Dune was published in 1976, it was a wild success, being the first sci-fi novel to be a New York Times bestseller in both paperback and hardcover. As fantastical as the worlds, imagery, and characters of Dune are, many of its aspects and characters are drawn from Frank Herbert's real life, people he knew, events he lived through, like being a political speechwriter, and the time he accidentally took a hallucinogenic compound while studying deserts in Mexico. But the story of Dune might have really started in 1957, when Frank Herbert traveled to Oregon, intending to write about the USDA using poverty grass to stabilize sand dunes. He spent the next 4 years, until 1961, researching for Dune, and then another 4 years, 1961 to 1965, writing and rewriting it. And as for the real people who inspired some of the mesmerizing characters we meet in Dune, Lady Jessica Atreides is based on Frank Herbert's wife, Beverly Herbert, right down to her supernatural abilities. Their son, Brian Herbert, tells us that in real life, Beverly Herbert had done some, quote, amazing paranormal feats, and that Frank Herbert often called her his White Witch, in a loving way. Mentats were based on Frank Herbert's paternal grandmother, Mary Stanley. Though illiterate, she could perform amazing calculations using just her mind. And of course, we see themes from various religions throughout Dune, but Frank Herbert's real-life aunts were Irish Catholic, and they tried pushing him into Catholicism when he was a child. He refused, and those aunts became the inspiration for the Bene Gesserit. After watching the Dune movies, I am now reading through the books, and I'm loving them. What do you think of this story? And is there any other interesting history that I missed? Let me know down below.